Welcome to a special Inside Carolina Roundtable. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Feel like I've seen two of you guys earlier today. That's Buck Sanders, Taylor Vippolis. But the man at the top, Greg Barnes, we have not talked to Greg today. Greg, a little bit of news broke this morning. Mack Brown out, will not be back next season. I know you've been working diligently. I wanted to get your thoughts to open us up. And before we start that, shout out to the almost 300 people that are in here as we get rolling. Greg, your thoughts on what's all transpired today?
Having some technical difficulties.
I think the main thing for me is that it was done. It was done now. It was done before the NC State game. I really kind of expected this to happen next week. I did expect this to happen. The fact that Mack Brown will not be coaching next year is not a surprise, but just the fact that this played out the way that it did is a little bit of a surprise. But there's a lot that we can dive into. But I think that the key thing is when you go back to Larry Fedora's last year, the final straw really for Bubba was the fact that recruiting had tanked. And if you look at where North Carolina is right now, yes, they have a small recruiting class, but it's ranked 78th nationally. And what that means is, you don't have to hit it out of the park every year in high school recruiting. But if you miss, you've got to nail it with the transfer portal. And that's just going to be a big ask for Mack Brown this year. And when you project ahead, Carolina's probably going to lose 14 starters. How does it get better? And I can only imagine that was part of the conversation that Bubba Cunningham had. And then, of course, going ahead and making the decision. I do think it's interesting that Mack clearly was not ready to stop coaching. He made that clear with his.
You muted yourself somehow.
And and the fact that he went on that PR boost to spread the word that, hey, I'm coming back. And then you get the news today that his plan was not what Bubba decided to adhere to. Bubba had other plans. But that's an interesting dynamic of this as well.
Greg, or excuse me, Buck, I think a lot of people they didn't think that Bubba had the gravitas or the pull to make this move. I think we've certainly seen that. Well, yes, he did. But your take on that dynamic at Carolina, Buck, I always got the sense, like Greg said, that Mack wasn't going to go out without being helped out. And, I can understand that. Coaches want to coach. It's like, what do you do? What else is there to do in life but coach? But, Buck, your take here, a little different than we talked about earlier on North Carolina and Bubba Cunningham specifically actually getting it done and doing it now on a Tuesday ahead of rivalry game against NC State.
Well, there was, and I heard this mostly through friends that I chat with, and then some on the message board as well. But there was some feeling out there that Bubba didn't have a green light to fire Mack. That had to be some sort of group decision in which Mack took part and acquiesced into his departure. That was the only way that he was going to leave North Carolina, was be on his own 2 feet, his own decision, go out his way. There was some thought behind that idea, but at the same time, if you're the athletic director and you say, hey, we need to change coaches, I need to let Mack know that we need to change coaches and begin a coaching search for the next head coach at North Carolina, and he was told, oh, well, no, you can't do that. You have to wait for Mack to agree with you about it or whatever. maybe I would play it differently if I was actually in that spot, but my feeling would be, I would say I need to find another job. If I don't have control over the athletic department and hiring and firing coaches, then you don't need me here. I need to go someplace where I can exercise the authority that an athletic director normally wields in this position. I don't think I was told when I was hired that I couldn't fire certain people, or certain coaches had to agree to step down before I could make an announcement. So it doesn't shock me that Bubba came to the conclusion that he did, and that and Mack didn't agree with it. I think at Texas, he didn't really kick up a big fuss about it when he left Texas, but he didn't step down voluntarily. They had to actually let him go, even at Texas, as horribly as that all went down. So it doesn't shock me that Bubba made the move that he did. It's sort of encouraging and makes you feel better about things at North Carolina, to know that there are certain avenues of authority there that don't get breached on account of who the coach in particular is. So I think that's a good thing, and it was necessary. I mean, think about how bad it would have been going into this off season. We talked about this in numerous times in numerous ways. They're getting ready to do an equity seating deal again next year in Kenan Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
How many season ticket holders or Rams Club members would just pass if that was the decision that Mack came back? So, yeah, I think it was the right thing to do, and glad that it got done. I like Mack. I wish he'd been more successful here, but this is the way it turns out. So, move on. Next man up, as they say in the game of football.
Greg, you got to follow.
I do. I think one interesting component of this is if you go back and look at North Carolina's Chancellor positions, you go from Meeser to Thorpe to Kevin Guskowitz. These are all long-term Carolina guys who knew a lot of the power brokers and were influenced at times and how some of that stuff worked. Well, there's a new man in charge, Lee Roberts, and what we don't know is exactly what Lee Roberts' role with all this was. But what we do know is that he's not tied to a lot of the old school Carolina ways. And of course, Bubba's not going to make this type of decision without approval from the Chancellor. That's part of it. So that's part of the kind of the political dialogue going on in the background. And I think a lot of people, to Buck's point, had questions as to whether or not Bubba Cunningham would make this move. I think everybody remembers back to the Hubert Davis hiring, where Roy went to Hubert during the season and said, "Hey, I'm going to make sure you're the guy that follows me when I retire." And to some extent, that was kind of out of Bubba's hands, even though there were others who wanted to take on more of a national search. This kind of goes against that idea, right, of there being power brokers in position to say yay or nay. We'll have to wait and see. We don't have the full details on that, but I do think that's an interesting component.
Vip, I want to get you in. We talked a lot, and you've been on the forefront as well. In fact, the breaking news was bylined by Mr. Taylor Vippolis. Taylor, we talked earlier today. Your thoughts after having a little bit of time to marinate on this? I think we all agree that Buck's point over the weekend is the product on the field just wasn't acceptable, period.
Yeah,
That's
I think
first and foremost.
Yeah, I think the only thing that kind of surprised me was the timing of it before the NC State game, and not like if you've already seen the season out to this point, what's the difference between doing it now and doing it on Sunday. But from everybody that I had talked to, there seemed like a growing belief that Bubba did not feel tied to Mack Brown, that he did not want Mack Brown to be the coach next season. Everything that you kind of heard behind the scenes was that they were working towards an agreeable exit for Mack Brown. And then Mack Brown wanted to continue coaching. So it's kind of hard to have an agreeable exit when one party wants to keep coaching. And I guess the only thing that I was kind of surprised by was when Mack Brown announced plans to return next season. I think a lot of people read into that as Mack Brown is going to be the head coach for North Carolina. And that's why when that happened, I kind of try to pump the brakes, knowing what was happening behind the scenes and just being like, most coaches plan to return to the school that they're at the next year. But at the end, I think Bubba just kind of saw that this was not working. Recruiting had fallen off a cliff. The apathy from the fan base had really kicked in to where it felt like a no-brainer that you can't keep this staff, where if you got to the offseason, it was going to be, Chip Lindsey, hey, it's your turn to fall on the sword. Let's get a new offensive coordinator, or let's replace some of the defensive coaches to kind of fall on the sword, when the common point for 6 years has been the head coach.
Yeah. Common denominator, as our friend Sherelle McMillan likes to say, and said a lot over the course of the years in the basketball. I'm going to interrupt the show for an important announcement, an important guest. And
we need like a breaking news sounder.
I need one. We're not as fancy as that here. I could bang on the thing. But I'm drinking out of my dog mug, and we need more dogs on this show. We don't need any more cats. So let's bring in this guy right here. Don
I get the big screen.
You get the big screen, the hot seat. Don, I think one thing we're talking about is one of the main reasons that this all went down is recruiting. And you've been all over it over the last, I guess, 6 or 7 hours, getting comments from commitments and hearing all. What do you make of all this? Mack Brown out, who knows in at this point, but yet there's still a job to do to acquire talent, and there's still a job to do for Don Callahan to interview that talent.
Yeah, it's and I've talked to a bunch of parents, a bunch of recruits in the last, what's it? Has it been 12 hours yet? I guess it hasn't even been 12 hours. And everyone's like, oh man, look at the timing right before Thanksgiving. And the problem is like, there is no good time from a recruiting standpoint to fire your coach, because what are you going to do? Wait until Sunday or Monday? I mean, that doesn't help anyone either. And so a lot of people are just kind of like thrown off a little by the timing and just trying to wrap their head around it. I think there were a lot of recruits, which I think surprised a lot of the posters on Inside Carolina, that were slightly caught off guard. I don't think this just completely blindsided anyone, but a lot of them were a little bit in shock. And I think it's because they're teenagers and they don't follow it so closely as fans do. And then also, every time they had a question or a concern about, is Mack going to stay, they call up Mack Brown, and Mack Brown was saying, no, I'm going to be here. And I mean, even Austin Alexander, in the quote that I had with him, mentioned I think it was Austin Alexander. I've talked to so many recruits, but check the recruit reaction to be sure. But there was a commitment who said that Mack had told him that he was going to remain coach at North Carolina throughout that player's tenure, which you were talking 4 or 5 years from now, which is pretty significant considering Mack's age.
Don, the question is, A, what is a head coach supposed to say? And B,
yes.
And B, have you ever heard of a head coach tell a recruit that they're not going to be there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And I think Mack is not being dishonest. I think Mack believed he was going to coach for the next 4 or 5 years, if not beyond that, in his head. But obviously, Mack isn't the only one making the decisions here. And really, and Tommy, you and I have talked about this, coaches just are wired to basically fight until the very end, to coach into the very end, to recruit into the very end. And I think the analogy you and I talked about, it was, even though you and I have only coached rec league, or maybe you've coached travel ball, is that when you even when you're a coach, even at that small level, you are still thinking you have a chance to win, even if you're getting blown out, until there's just no point for you to come back. And I think, you take it to a higher level, and you take it with the egos and everything like that. And coaches obviously are wired to basically work and recruit and coach until the very bitter end.
Don, I have a question for you. North Carolina's
Sure.
current recruiting class is 77th. One of the names that has kind of floated around is John Sumrall from Tulane. His class is 74th. If Carolina was to go in that direction, how easy do you think it would be to bring his class to UNC, considering that most of those guys were getting recruited for the American? Or is this kind of something like Carolina has to restart their entire board if they bring in a coach from that group of 5 level?
It's so hard to say, because I think everyone looks at Indiana and what Cignetti did there, or is doing there. And I think we have seen other coaches try similar approaches without the success that Indiana has had, and you got to remember that, whatever coach is hired, if he's a head coach of a school, whether it's a group of 5 or I guess it probably wouldn't be a Power 5, but wherever, they are going to try to poach some of their recruits and bring them over. At the same time, if it's a group of 5 program, obviously North Carolina has a little bit better access to the talent pool is a little bit better for UNC than what they were dealing with at the group of 5 level. So there's a little bit of that. And then obviously location plays a factor into things too. So, it's a little bit easier of a pitch to make if the kid is, in the Carolinas, as opposed to wherever else, depending on what school this head coach is coming from. So, yes, I think what you're probably more likely to see is maybe some transfers more than the commits, I would think. But again, we only have really one true season of kind of sampling of this, and everyone wants to look at Indiana and see what they have done.
Don, speaking about the recruiting aspect of things, when you look at some of the initial names on the list that are getting attention, you've got a couple college coaches who have decent odds of making the college football playoff. You've got one at the NFL level. I think it's an interesting idea of, Carolina, I believe, and I've heard as such, they're really going to be focused on getting the right hire. Mm-hmm. And if that means maybe they need to take their time and wait and provide some opportunity for that coach to progress through whatever they need to progress through, whether it be playoffs or postseasons or whatever it may be, there's a thought that takes priority instead of signing day on December 4th, or instead of the opening of the portal on December 9th. The fans, of course, who follow recruiting and follow your work are really focused on those 2 dates. Do you think if North Carolina takes a slower approach and tries to make sure they get a home run higher, that it could be detrimental by not putting a priority on maybe the signing day or the portal opening date?
Yeah, I think you're going to obviously have a gap, and again, we have such a small sample size with this stuff. And I would think it would definitely put the program back even further, as far as, because obviously the portal, it's speed dating. And if you don't get in there pretty quickly, you're not getting the top targets, and you're settling for some of the leftovers. And the portal isn't this great deep batch of talent. And sometimes in North Carolina, we've seen the past couple of portals, past few years, is that North Carolina goes in for a specific position, they look, and there's nothing that's really worth a damn to pull out from that position, and then has to kind of bypass that position. It's just because there's no guarantee position wise and talent wise what the portal is going to be, and there's a lot of wishful thinking with certain things. Grass is always greener sort of situations. You look at the quarterbacks group from this past portal. I mean, really, how many of those guys really worked out for the programs that added them? Maybe Miami, maybe a couple others, not much. But so I think it would put the program back. Now, could the coach, get him back on track, in the next cycle? Perhaps, but I think it would be a deeper hole, because it's just with everybody being able to, because the other part that I don't think you mentioned, but the longer that this goes, I think you would think the more transfers out would happen too. And so you're also depleting the current roster. I mean, if you were waiting like a month to make a decision, and I know nobody wants to do that, I would hope they wouldn't, then, I mean, the roster could be in pretty tough shape. There's not going to be anyone on the high school level, for very few guys in the high school level, worth a damn to recruit. And the portal is going to be pretty depleted also at that point. And so now you're stuck with, the next couple cycles really trying to make up and build up that depth. And I think that would be difficult.
Talking with Inside Carolina's recruiting expert, Don Callahan, who's been hard at work. Last question for Don before I let you go and get back to your there's some great wallpaper back there. I guess that's the curtains. Don, everybody's asking about Bryce
This
Baker.
is not my place, but
yeah. It's nicer TV. Well, no, you would have 16 TVs up there. But everybody asks about Bryce Baker. Just speak to the importance of a quarterback knowing who's going to be their coach, who's going to be their offensive coordinator specifically. I mean, these are big decisions, not just for North Carolina, but for a guy like Bryce Baker.
Yeah, so, I mean, the Bryce Baker situation reminds me a lot of the Sam Howell situation. Both, I felt like Sam would have gone to North Carolina even if Larry Fedora was there. Actually, I'm pretty certain. And I talked to his dad all the time during that situation. But more than anything, they wanted to know who was going to be developing Sam, what sort of scheme Sam was going to be going into. Did it fit his skill set? And it was particularly important because, Sam's dad, Duke Hal, was or is offensive coordinator at the high school level. Has a very prolific offense, so he understands it a little bit more than the average parent. And I think you're seeing the same thing with Bryce Baker. A lot of people, I was surprised, kind of from reading responses to Bryce Baker's father's response. I think it makes sense what he's saying. Like, they want to know who's going to develop their son, and they want to know if the system is going to fit his school set, his skill set. And so, yeah, I would, if I'm advising a parent of a quarterback, I would tell them, yeah, you must know who's going to developing your son and what system that you're walking into. And so, yeah, I don't expect them to make a decision with North Carolina, at least, until they know who the OC is. And obviously you need the head coach first. At the same time, before this, I had people kind of reaching out to me here, and I heard Clemson is interested in Bryce. I heard Penn State is really interested in Bryce, and a bunch of other schools. I think Georgia at one point was interested in Bryce. And talking to Bryce's dad, he said, we just shut that stuff down completely. We've been offered to come on visits, and if you look, Bryce he attended every single UNC home game. We'll see if that trend continues this Saturday, and then also at least went to one away game, the Florida State game. So it kind of shows just where their mindset is at. But again, it's going to be important with the OC. And going back to Greg's question, they aren't going to wait forever, because they do have a lot of really good opportunities on the table. And so I think if push comes to shove, if they need to wait a few weeks, then they probably won't do that, and they probably will. They want to get their son in school as soon as possible.
I just had myself muted.
I can't hear you, Tom.
That is Don Callahan.
Oh, man.
If you, it's first time for everything, Don. If you have any questions,
I don't get a
Don,
question from Buck.
Well, Buck, do
It's
you have a
good to
question?
see you. I'll tell you that.
I only came
somebody
here.
wanted to
I only
know.
came here because Buck.
Somebody
And
wanted
Buck
to
doesn't
know
even talk
if
to
somebody wanted to know if you were at Ross's house in Greensboro.
No, I'm not. I'm at Atlantic Beach on a family holiday vacation. So,
Well, if you wanted to see me, you could have come further south and come to Myrtle Beach.
Well, so Tommy asked me to come on. I said no, and then he said Buck's going to be there, and I said I will be there. You tell me what time. And I even wore this shirt for you, Buck.
Yeah, I'm going to have to give you a raise. Is the only thing I need to. I'm going to have to do, or just send you 50 in cash.
Don Callahan wins the ugly sweater award here. Don, appreciate you taking time away for that vacation. I hear somebody hollering for you in the background.
Yeah.
So you need to get
Someone's
on back.
not happy in that room.
Take care of Kobe. He misses his daddy, and I don't blame him. We're going to miss you, Don. We're going to cut you loose. Folks need to pay attention to Inside Carolina's Tar Pit Premium message board to get all of Don's work. And it's just an incredible amount of work that the whole entire staff has done in Don's work, interviewing all these guys. Let me talk about Johnny T-shirt. Vip, you want to do Johnny T-shirt right fast for me? Will you do it? Yeah,
I could plug Johnny T-shirt.
Plug Johnny T-shirt.
If you're going to be in Chapel Hill, you could visit Johnny T-shirt on Franklin Street. And if not, no worries. You could go online to johnnytshirt.com. They have everything that the Carolina fan could possibly want. The hats, the T-shirts, the jerseys, you name it, they've got it. Black Friday coming up, the holidays coming up. They are running great deals, great people, great customer service. And don't forget, Inside Carolina premium subscribers save 10% off their orders.
And if you are not an Inside Carolina premium subscriber, now's the time to be one. Not only for that Johnny T-shirt deal, but for all of this stuff, Buck Sanders columns, everything going on. Greg Barnes has dropped a column that is not premium, but it's on the message boards as well. National guys will pay the bills here. I see Roundtable. Be right back on the audio version, but we're sticking here on the video version, the live video version. 850 people in the live chat. Had almost 800 in the middle of the night last night after a basketball game. Had 1,000 today at lunch hour to listen to us talk about this. And then Greg Barnes shows up and we have 850 more. Greg, I'm going to ask you a question, and then Buck, I want your comments as well. Question out of the chat, and Ross Rollins asked, can you all talk about how capable Bubba is to make a good hire given his track record? Greg, I think that question might be in your wheelhouse.
Given his track record, I would say that Bubba's got a pretty good track record, right?
It's more than just football and basketball at Carolina.
It is. And, I mean, Hubert, he gets credit for Hubert, and Hubert's doing pretty well right now. Larry had it going for a while. I mean, without Larry, we don't have Vip. So that's, in and of itself is something. And I think I understand there's frustration and there's been hurt feelings and there's a lot of raw emotions right now with regard to Mack. I get it. But things were in pretty bad shape in the fall of 2018. And there's a variety of reasons for what happened at the end of Larry's tenure. I get it. But when Mack came in, the hope was, can he bring back a level of respectability? Can he repair North Carolina high school coaching relations? Can he generate some fundraising and kind of get the program in the right direction? Now, I think there's a good conversation to be had that Mack did a lot of those things and probably got too far away from the key goal of if it had been said, look, 5 years, we're going to rebuild the recruiting ties. We're going to get money raised. I mean, he raised $24 million in his first 3 years, which is crazy. They doubled the assistant coaching salary pool, which is critical. But he probably should have left after last season. And I think if he had done that, then there would be much better feelings about his exit. And there's this raw emotion right now. So you have to appreciate Mack, for the most part, did what he was supposed to do. Now, did he get Carolina to that next level? No, he did not. And that's why he is no longer the coach. but he did do some good things. And I'm not ready to say that Bubba, erred in making that decision. That to be said, I mean, Bubba has a long track record of making some good decisions. Brady Hoke was a good pick when he was at Tulsa. So I think you have to give him some leeway and just understand that everybody makes mistakes, but he's picked the right guy on a number of occasions, and it's really a crapshoot. I know a lot of people like Schumann, for example, for good reason, but the guy's never been a head coach. And so to think that a coach is going to take him and say, all right, well, it's surefire pick here, and he's going to take us to the college football playoff. Nobody knows that. But a lot of athletic directors around the country would be willing to take that bet. And you just do the best you can do and move on. And I think Bubba deserves some credit for being able to make this decision when he did, because I do think it was a necessary decision.
Yeah, Tommy, if you don't mind, I have a point on Schumann. We're going to get into some of the candidates later, but Greg mentioned that he's never been a head coach before. You could also say with Schumann, he's never been at a school that didn't have unlimited resources. So if you bring him to Carolina, he's just realistically comparing Georgia's resources to North Carolina's resources, he's not going to have those.
Yeah, you can talk to people who have done both, who have been involved in both, and there is a vast difference. We'll get into that in a minute. But Buck, I want to get your take on, throw up another comment here. Courtney Loudermilk, that's a name. Will this hire be Bubba's legacy? Second major hire after Mack. But kind of your thoughts here again on Bubba, and what I asked Greg is how much is Bubba on the hook? We always talk about how athletic directors are tied to their hires, and if the hire failed, then the athletic director and everybody else can go and all that. How much faith do you have knowing or to know that this is going to be what fans are expecting it to be, and that's a home run, for lack of a better term?
The way I think of this is not in terms of Bubba's hires, but Bubba's fires, and especially in the football program. He waited a couple of years after the bottom had fallen out at North Carolina to let go of Larry Fedora. We're talking a 2-9 season and a 3-9 season, right? 5 games in 2 years. And after going 3-9, he gave Larry another year, and then Larry had a 2-9 year. I don't think there's ever been a time, or there's not been another time, where a sitting head coach at North Carolina managed to get fired after putting up a winning record. Although maybe Bunning did it in his final year, but that decision was made after Virginia. Did he go 6-5, 6-6 that last year? I can't remember.
I think 6-6.
Yeah, but look at the record that Mack left behind. A couple of 8-year seasons, a couple of 1 9-year season. He only had 1 losing season, and he gets fired. That's the bar that's gone up at North Carolina with this coaching change. You don't have, it's not required that your coach goes 2-9 and 3-9, or the horrendous records that Bunning threw up towards the tail end of his career. I think 1 year he may even had a 1-loss team.
He did.
One win team. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Greg.
let me interrupt. I told you wrong. 6-6 was 04. He was actually 3-9 his last year in 06.
Okay, so I mean, it's pretty solid that I don't think there's another coach that wanted to come back to North Carolina that's ever been fired after having a winning season or a 600 or 500 season. The bar has gone up at North Carolina. It's not good enough. Maybe 8-4 is not good enough around here anymore. And that's what this firing to me signifies. Now, also you factor into it that Mack's age, The recruiting class, which is probably as large a factor as anything else. You're talking about we have 10 recruits in this class, is what I'm seeing.
Currently,
There's 10 commits so far, 2 4-stars. You know, for Mack Brown, that is about the worst he's ever done, period, at any school, anywhere. So I think the way to view what's going on, or North Carolina as a program, is to examine what is good enough at North Carolina anymore. And clearly what Mack did wasn't good enough. So, I would view this particular coaching change really more informative based on the fact that Bubba did fire Mack than anything about Mack's record or any of those things. So it's interesting from that aspect.
I will say this, and Greg, you and I talked about it, and I think we've all talked about it in some form. I never imagined, and people kept saying, you got to fire him, you got to fire him, you got to fire him. And I never imagined, and I'm still not 100% sure it would have happened had they not laid the bed or something in the bed in Boston College. But an 8-4 or 9-4 coach getting fired at North Carolina. But Buck, your point is a great one, is that people talk about, has the bar been raised, has the program prestige been raised, or whatever. I think you're exactly right. North Carolina's never done this before, and here we are. I'm going to try to bring in Jason Staples, and he has joined us again. And I can't see you, Jason. I can't see you on there, Jason, for whatever reason. I can see your picture below me, but I can't see you there. But anyway, let's talk.
Tommy, can I make a point? Can Jason hear us?
Let me see.
Okay, I can make a
Jason,
comment.
can you hear us?
In. He looks frozen.
Yeah, he's frozen.
He looks like he's on a plane.
He might.
He might be. He was supposed to land at 8:30.
Nobody else could see that besides us right now, but he most certainly is frozen on a plane.
And it just disappeared. So, Lord help us. I hope Jason's all right. Somebody check the TSA line. Greg, go ahead and make a point.
Well, just in terms of North Carolina's record, I think this is one of the benefits of the advanced metric age. And I know there are some old school traditionalists who don't like to hear about the metrics, but I think it gives you a better idea of how good teams actually are. We talked about, I guess, in the preseason, North Carolina went 6-6 in 2004, and Buck talking about Bunning kind of triggered that memory. But North Carolina played the number one ranked strength of schedule in the country that year and went 6-6. This team is 6-5, and currently its strength of schedule is 91st. And that probably will get worse after playing NC State, because NC State is not any good. And that's the worst SOS among the Power 4 schools. So even if Carolina wins and they get to 7-5, is that really something to brag about? And I think that's part of the challenge. If you look at, I posted this in my column, but if you look at F+, which is FEI and SP+ combined, since Mack returned in 2019, Carolina is 0-for-8 against teams that finished the season ranked in the top 20 of that metric. 0-for-8. So they have not won a significant game in 6 years. And then they're 8-14 against top 40 teams. So even against top 40 teams, they have a losing record. And so, yes, they've had some success and they've won some games, but are there really games that we can kind of brag about? Hey, this is, even though they've struggled this year, they had this win or they had that win. And at least Bunning had that, right, with the Miami game and 04 and those types of things. So I think that component of the equation factors in as well.
All right, let's try one more time here. This is the chat. Jason, can you hear us?
Oh, he's dark, but we can see him.
I can hear us. I can hear
The
you.
man
No,
is.
you probably hear me on the plane.
This is hot. I don't know if I've ever interviewed somebody on a plane.
Has the snack cart come by yet?
Snack cart has
Can
come
I get a
by
ginger
multiple
ale?
times, but I cannot afford the snacks, so we're good to go.
Let's get into something that I think is relevant, Jason, and you know, wink twice if you're going down. Somebody say we hope you're not on Spirit. But let's talk about what kind of coach North Carolina needs. We've seen the names that are out there. And Vip, I'm gonna get you off the front. I'm gonna put Jason on the front. We've seen the names: Sumrall, Schumann, other names that have come out. But Jason, in your opinion, what kind of coach does Carolina need to get the credibility back in this program? Credibility, accountability, and all those abilities that North Carolina has lacked, as Greg so succinctly pointed out with the numbers that do not lie.
Yeah, I think the first thing is basically thinking about they need somebody who has a track record of recent wins and who can point to a reputation as being an outstanding on-field developer of talent and in-game coach. So we are in an era where recruiting always matters most. Talent acquisition always matters most. Coach Bowden always said the secret to being a great coach was having better players than the guy on the other sideline. But we're in an era where, a magnetic personality on the recruiting trail is not the most important thing in terms of player acquisition. You're going to need the resources. You're going to need some of those other things that are going to have a bigger factor now bigger impact now than what you had in the past. So to me, you've got to have, if you got to have a guy in Chapel Hill, you got to have a guy that is going to sell players on a culture of work, and we are going to help you get to the next level. We're going to make you look great in our systems, and who can point to different ways on film and say, this is how we're going to use you. Here's how we're cutting edge, etc. You want that. And I think, I would favor, I've seen the names floating around. I would favor someone who has had a track record of success at multiple stops, ideally as a head coach. So to me, your Tulane head coach, the JMU head coach, those would be two of the first guys I would consider here, because I want somebody, ideally you want somebody who's young, who can present himself as bleeding edge, who can present himself as tough, hard-nosed, and someone who's going to develop and potentially get you to the next level. And I think you've got to get guys on the recruiting trail and in the portal to buy into that, and then have a track record of being able to develop and get guys to sort of punch above their weight. I want a coach who, wherever he's been, has punched above their weight. You look at like Chris Kleeman at Kansas State, I believe it is. You look at the current Kansas and Kansas State coaches, both of those guys. They came up from lower levels and they won at an absurd rate at those lower levels. And that's what you want. You want somebody who walks in the door and they've got a track record of that kind of disproportionate success at different levels. To me, if I'm North Carolina, that's what I'm trying to look for, is a guy that I think is going to be able to build a program that punches above its weight, because Carolina's brand, once they start punching above their weight, is going to carry a lot of weight once it comes to actually attracting more and more talent to the campus. So get me someone who is going to take a group that might win 6 or might win 7 under another coach and is going to end up winning 8, 9, or 10 under that coach. That's what I'm looking for.
Greg, I'll pull you in, and then Buck, I want to get your take here. He's on the tarmac, folks. Remember, I said this was a tarmac firing after the Boston College game. Well, there you go. Jason's out there on the tarmac looking for that firing, and we found it. Greg, North Carolina needs to shed the label that they've had, accurate or not. And we know what that label has been. But my question to you is this a situation where Carolina needs to completely clean house and completely gut it? And I think that's what makes it a little bit different with maybe Lee Roberts as the chancellor and all. But your take here on how far Carolina needs to sort of excise this current staff or the current way that it's been done for a while and sort of move forward in this new era of college athletics.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the key point there, Tommy, is that this is a new era of college football, of college athletics. And so you want to set your next staff up for success. And so that's not going to be dictating to the next coach, hey, you need to keep this guy or you need to keep this person. Give them a full scope to make whatever changes they deem necessary. And I would almost go to say if you're going to bring in somebody who maybe has not been a head coach before or doesn't have much experience, then you take advantage of some consulting options and get people who have been in the business for a long time, who understand what it takes just to get some help of understanding, and you can bring in people as analysts and those types of things. And that was one of the interesting things about the way this went down is I think Mack was kind of set up to be that type of person for the next head coach. Kind of like, Frank Beamer was when he stepped aside. And it just sounds like right now, maybe that's not in the cards. But I think that's critical. I don't know you have to clean house, but you do have to give that head coach that you hire full authority to make whatever changes they deem necessary.
But we've talked about this, and I want to get your same take on the question I asked Greg. It's almost like you can you move forward if you carry a lot of the old with you? Does it make any sense? Can Carolina totally restart this program and still have so many ties to the past?
I've seen it done both ways, and successfully and unsuccessfully over the years. Fedora, when he came in, he fired everybody down to the water boys over there just about. If I recall, he didn't keep a single staff member. And Mack, when he came in, he kept several staff members. I remember he kept Tommy Thigpen. There may have been somebody else or two on staff that he kept. And it's not uncommon for a new coach coming in, particularly one that doesn't have a long track record, to want to put his stamp and his mark on the program instead of keeping somebody from the prior staff. But it's not uncommon for even a coach in those situations to come in and have one guy on the staff that he keeps, maybe an OL coach, somebody like that, that's not going to be too controversial. But, I think it almost is helpful to have somebody in the building that knows the names of your players, when a coach first shows up. So that doesn't frighten me too much about whether he's going to keep anybody. I don't have strong feelings about that. There are certain people I would object to. Certainly he's probably going to want to hire his own offensive coordinator, own defensive coordinator, and certain positions like that he's going to want to fill himself. But I don't think that it's going to be, make a great deal of difference if he has one or even two people left over from the previous staff. I don't think it's necessary, but I think he can if he thinks they're the best person for the job.
Vip, your thoughts here? I think, being an assistant coach is a tough job. They get paid a fair amount of money, but you're always at the pleasure, I guess, of whoever. Your thoughts here on moving forward? And somebody in the chat asked, let me see, what's that, Lil Popester ask, I don't recognize the name, so shout out to a new person in here. Give us who you got in mind, Vip. Who you got in mind if you were the man making the decision here?
Yeah, I think there's a few unrealistic candidates that I would inquire with, like Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator at the Chargers right now, who is really good under Harbaugh at Michigan. Ben Johnson, I think, is another unrealistic name, but just give him a call and make him say no to the job with the success he's done in the NFL with the Lions. I think those two guys are future NFL head coaches, and I think the Carolina job is a step down. So for me, my list would be like John Sumrall, Glenn Schumann. Those would be my first two names, and those are two names where the Carolina job is most likely going to be the top job in this cycle or one of the top jobs in this cycle. I don't think you get to a situation where both those guys say no and you have to get much further down the short list. I think the one thing to kind of keep in mind with this Carolina job opening, realistically, like UNC, where they're at and where they kind of project to be in the landscape of college football, they're not going to be able to hire a sure thing. Like there's no Lane Kiffin coming to Chapel Hill. There's no like going and poaching one of these guys from a school in the SEC or the Big Ten. Almost every best case scenario where you're getting somebody who's not a UNC alum, somebody with UNC connections like an Arthur Smith or Ben Johnson, every best case scenario is an SEC coach or an SEC school wanting your coach in 4 or 5 years. Now, can somebody like Sumrall build UNC up to a point where if you tell most Carolina fans like, hey, LSU is going to come knocking in 5 years to try to take your head coach, that means those 5 years were very successful. And at the very least, you're putting your coach in a situation to be like, hey, let me consider what I've built here during this time. But yeah, I don't think there's a sure thing in this with these candidates and what the Carolina job kind of projects. But if the worry with somebody like Sumrall is that he's going to eventually leave you for a Kentucky, I think that's going to be the case for most guys you hire that don't have strong Carolina ties.
Jason, I'm going to bring you in, but I didn't want to make you look bad with your young lady in the picture. Can you hear us, Jason?
We're good.
Give me. You mentioned Schumann earlier. Give me some names who you would like to see North Carolina hire, and maybe if you want to mention some assistants that should be given the opportunity to stick around.
Yeah. So for me, Sumrall at Tulane, James Madison coach, whose name is escaping me at the moment,
Bob Chesney.
Bob Chesney. Yeah.
Bob Chesney. He would be on my list. Schumann, I hear talked about by all sorts of coaching staffs and all that. I'm not sure he would be on my list, to be honest. But I do agree with Vip that you do kind of set an unrealistic wish list, and you work your way down that list first. I think I would talk probably to Dan Mullen, who is a guy that he's still under 55 and has been really successful having teams punch above their weight wherever he's going.
We're losing you. You are moving out of the I'm gonna pull you out. You're moving out of the range of the 10-4. We've got Greg. Your thoughts here. Get in and sort of close us out. We're about an hour into this. North Carolina has moved on from Mack Brown. Don Callahan joined us earlier talking about the need to maybe have this done quickly, given the timeline, and we think that's probably why it's been done at this moment. But Greg, your thoughts on what Carolina does moving forward?
Well, we've talked about and kind of hinted at the fact that this is a new landscape in college athletics. And so I think we really need to take a step back and think about what a head coach role is moving forward. And it's always going to be about coaching and development and those types of things and being a CEO. But what Mack Brown did so well and how he elevated himself above everybody else for so long was he was a master recruiter. And with the arrival of NIL and the portal, the same skill set was just not as important anymore. And I think that's important to note moving forward. I guess it was, I don't know if it was Taylor or Jason made the comment of, you don't necessarily need to be an elite recruiter anymore. So what do you need? And I think that's one of the things that makes the NFL guys interesting with Smith and Ben Johnson. If you're swinging for the fences, is they have a NFL mindset and they understand how to work with the players, and the players, of course, want to get to the NFL. But there's negotiations and how kids are talked to these days, especially coming out of the portal. So you have to reimagine what it means to attract players and how you talk to those players and how you get these deals signed. And there's a lot of support at North Carolina now with Oldwell and what's coming down the line with, when the House settlement passes or is expected to pass next spring. So I think that's unique, and that makes things interesting. Schumann, he's considered by some to be a genius. I get it. I think he's going to have a bright future. But I agree with Jason that you want to see somebody who has had some success. And I know right now there are probably some Alabama fans who are questioning the decision to hire Kalen DeBoer. But I think he was the best hire this past offseason. Because if you go back and look at what he did at Fresno and Washington, I mean, even with his record this year, he's 112-15 at 3 stops. The guy wins. He wins. And I think it's interesting when you talk about Sumrall. He took over for Chip Lindsey at Troy. And Chip struggled at Troy as head coach. Sumrall comes in, and what does he do? He wins 2 Sun Belt championships. He's 32-6 at 2 different stops. And he didn't take over a good program.
21-2 in conference.
I mean, that is impressive. That is getting it done. And so while Schumann may be like that, he hasn't proved it yet. Sumrall's done it at 2 different places. And I think for me, that makes him probably the top of my list currently. But it is all about kind of reimagining what the head coach role is going to be moving forward, what you need out of that position. And that's what Bubba has to figure out. And that's what makes all these things challenging because, the game passed Roy by. Roy acknowledged it and handed things off. Nick Saban talked about things kind of changing so much that he couldn't handle it the way he once did. That's going to change with when you're hiring these coaches too. And whoever figures that out first is going to be ahead of the game. And we just have to see if Bubba and his crew are up to that challenge.
Vip, you and then Buck's going to close us out. To Greg's point, recruiting is not as important as it once was. It's about money and it's about development. That's my stance. So I'm in agreement here. I want a coach that's proven that they can win at multiple places and not just at the places that have all the money and all the resources. And Tulane would not qualify to have all the money and all the resources. But Vip, your take as we get out of here, close us out with your closing thoughts. Buck, then you're up. And I may pull Jason back in here depending on if the plane has landed.
Yeah, I probably just want to reinforce that I don't think there is such a thing as a home run hire for North Carolina this coaching cycle, with the uncertainty that comes with being an ACC member. But for what you're looking for in a coach, Sumrall checks off most of the boxes, and there's going to be concerns with everybody. Like he's never done it at a Power 4 level. But then you have somebody like Glenn Schumann who's never done it without the unlimited resources, or you have somebody like Arthur Smith who's been out of college since 2010. The one thing I think does excite me about the Arthur Smith potential being the head coach. I saw Memphis got $25 million from FedEx to fund their NIL. $25 million would be North Carolina's quarterback budget, I think, if Arthur Smith comes here.
I can't even believe we're talking about that kind of money. Buck, and there's a point I want to make before we get out of here as well. North Carolina needs to get this done right, but they also need to get it done sooner than later. Don talked about guys wanting to make a decision. It's not all about high school recruits. It's about your own players and securing and retaining the players you need to keep on this roster. And people in the chat have asked, which players should they aim to keep the most? You got all of that kind of situation going on. But other teams in this cutthroat world, Buck, other teams are swooping in and trying to acquire your talent as we speak. So North Carolina needs to move. They need to make a solid hire. If it's not already in the bag, it needs to get in the bag and get out as soon as possible. But close us out. Another successful Inside Carolina Roundtable, whatever 1,000 people in here earlier. The floor is yours, Mr. Sanders.
First I'd like to talk a little bit about Sumrall versus Schumann, which I think that's the topic under discussion pretty much in the comments and here among us to an extent. But Schumann was Nick Saban's general manager for a while at Alabama. And by that I mean, there's this position like this developed over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and maybe a little longer, of people like Pat Suddas, who essentially is the general manager of the North Carolina football team. And he's involved in all aspects of recruiting and majorly involved in the portal. And Greg was talking about, some of those types of skills had passed Mack Brown by. And I'm sure Sumrall is fully versed in that stuff as well. But it's encouraging to me that Schumann is a personnel guy. That's what he's about. That's how he came up through the ranks. He eventually, became, took over in linebackers, and then from there became the DC. And his name has been bandied about this entire offseason, not just by North Carolina. So I don't know that I would prefer Schumann over Sumrall. I probably wouldn't. But in terms of having experience relevant to the era that we're living in, Schumann might be the top of the list. He probably knows more about the transfer portal and all those types of things than any other candidates on the roster. And the thing about it is, in this case, it seems to me, I don't know if it was by coincidence. I generally distrust coincidental stuff. So looks like Bubba had a type when he went searching for possible replacements for Mack. Number one, he wanted a young coach. Everybody that's even being spoken to is under the age of 50, and Schumann is like 34. So, he's like half the age of Mack Brown, or less than half the age of Mack Brown. So anyway, it's youth, is one characteristic. The other one is between Schumann and Sumrall, which is what we've kind of been talking about. Both of them come from the defensive side of the ball, and I think that's something that Bubba wants. And I don't know if if that would prevent him from making the offer to Smith if Smith was amenable first, or to Freddie Kitchens, who's been an offensive guy. We don't necessarily think that Freddie will get an offer, but the guys that Bubba's considering is a type, young defensive side of the ball, and familiar with the way the new world we live in works. And as far as those two, I don't think you would go wrong. I don't think that Sumrall is a surefire hit at North Carolina. Look at Larry Fedora. I mean, he came from a G5 school, had never coached at a Power 5 school before. Then he did okay, but eventually ran out of gas. So there's no guarantees in life. I think they should fully vet Schumann, talk to him, see how they feel about him. And a lot of this often comes down to that. I can remember when Mark Richt didn't get hired because they didn't like him, basically. It was a personality thing. So, yeah, I think Bubba has a type he's after. And I think probably either Schumann or Sumrall will fit the bill, and that $25 million that Taylor mentioned, that would probably benefit the team in several different ways, right? So it's going to be interesting. The thing I'm looking forward to is that this offseason will be a lot more fun to cover at Inside Carolina than it has the last 3 years.
Jason Staples from the Tarmac wants to get one more thought in here. Jason, get in here so we can get out.
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody of something that I talked about the last time Carolina was looking for a hire, and that is my Butch Jones rule. That is the rule that if you're going to hire a coach for a top football program in college football, when you interview this coach, the thing you need to be thinking first and foremost is if this were a, say, Fortune 100 company, a Fortune 500 company that had nothing to do with football, would I hire this guy to run my company? And if the answer is no, then you don't hire that coach. You have to have, this is the CEO test, or again, I call it the Butch Jones test. If the guy reminds you more of a 6th grade gym teacher than he does somebody who can run a major company, then you pass and you find somebody who's going to fit that bill, who's going to be able to run a company. Because these organizations, the organizational skill of being able to set the vision, of being able to establish what you need organizationally to delegate the right things, to establish culture, those are the most important things for a head coach in this era. And you've got, and the recruiting part is part of that, but you've got to get a guy who can bring those guys on board, who can recruit, who can go out and get them the funding and all of that to be able to recruit. All of these are CEO skills. Once you're there, you've got that. Now you can move on to other things. But the CEO test is, I think, this is the, if yes, okay, you can move on and he's a legitimate candidate. If no, that guy should not be hired.
I agree with you, Jason. And I also agree that it's time for us to go. It has been the Inside Carolina Roundtable. Greg Barnes, Buck Sanders, Taylor Vippolis. That was Jason Staples live from the dark side of the moon. Somebody asked in the chat, will Tommy be hosting the post-game basketball tonight at probably 2 a.m? Yes. Yes, he will.
Keep it going.
Keep it going. We're going 4 and 24 hours. And
I thought we were going to stay on and do a watch along.
Needs to be a Mystery Science Theater watch of the game.
We could just leave the cameras on. I don't know if anybody wants to see all that, especially not in this house. But yes, and then we got game plan tomorrow night. Greg, we got a game plan tomorrow night, 9:00. There is a football game on Saturday, and folks watching this, we are doing it on Wednesday night because obviously we want everybody to have a good Thanksgiving, and we actually want to have some time away from this StreamYard, away from this video. Shout out to everybody that's joined us. We had almost 1,000 in the chat at one moment. Shout out to Buck, Taylor's work, Greg's column. I'm Tommy, and shout out to Jason for taking time. Stay tuned to Inside Carolina for any moment news on the North Carolina football coach. Johnny T-shirt and congruity. Take care of them. Everybody stay safe.